So in the 2019 survey, you agreed with youth that affordable housing is a major issue. And so we're wondering, what steps have you taken to promote housing for all since the passage of the affordable housing bond?
Yeah, so since the bond passed, we've been able to invest a lot more money into affordable housing than we were before, which has been really great. And we have a number of projects in the pipeline and a number of projects that are on the ground using both that bond money as well as the federal money, federal entitlement money that we already get. That's also part of our housing budget, as well as the city's dedicated housing fund, which is now a 2-cent tax levy that also goes into the same pot of money. I'm the council liaison to the Durham Housing Authority, and so I've also been able to have a front row seat to their redevelopment plans for all of their properties. And they've already done one big renovation at a senior property in downtown Durham and are moving forward with a number of complete rebuilds of of buildings in their communities in downtown. We recently, I think last week, was the opening of a brand new all affordable apartment building right next to the bus station called Willard Street Apartments. And I was able to go and tour it, and it is so incredibly nice. Like my standard for affordable housing is, would I want to live here? Would I want to raise my kids here? And I was like, yes, I would move out of my house right now and move into this building. There's a fitness center. There's a little playground right outside. It has amazing views of downtown. And I think it's really a statement of values, right? That like we want our low and moderate income neighbors to be able to have the same kind of quality housing as other people in this community do, and to be able to afford that. So I was really excited to see that project get off the ground. We've been working on improving our homeless housing system and have contracted with a local organization to do homeless street outreach and encampment outreach. And so that's been a new effort for us, particularly that it kind of came into being around the issue of encampments, because we had one sort of high profile encampment that we were getting a lot of, was getting a lot of media, and a lot of people, more and more people were moving in there, and we needed to figure out a way to provide people with services in a way that could, get them into affordable, accessible, permanent housing without stigmatizing people who were living, in tents in this encampment, without just taking away their ability to camp somewhere, like we're not going to make anyone's lives better by just giving them one less place to live. So figuring out how to like provide services for people in a way that was sustainable, and that was so that they could be sustainable in a permanent housing. But also, we wanted to make sure that we were doing the right kind of outreach for and meeting people's individual needs. So we've done more of that. We've increased our funding for rent stabilization, and have had a lot of funding this year, thankfully, from the federal government to do direct rent relief for families who've been impacted by COVID. We've increased our funding for eviction diversion, which has been really great, making sure that families who are facing eviction have access to a lawyer, can usually get them a much better outcome than if they didn't have a lawyer. Even if they still have to leave their homes, they can often do it without having an eviction on their permanent rental record, which can give people, make it hard to find housing in the future. What else have we done? So we've increased funding for partners who are doing multifamily rental housing. So the city will provide some amount of subsidy in order for some number of the units to be affordable, usually at 60% of AMI. And so we've done a number of those projects with affordable housing partners, with DHA, and with other, private developer partners and other nonprofit housing developer partners. We actually just got a report yesterday. That's why this is all in my brain right now. We got a report at our work session yesterday about the progress of our 5-year housing plan. So I'm happy to send that to y'all too, if you're interested in more of the details. It's got our 5-year goals, and then like where we are on each goal, how many housing units have been produced, and like how many are in the pipeline for each of those goals. And it's really good data. And it's probably on the Community Development Department website right now. And if it's not, it will be soon. So I'll get that link for y'all.
Yeah, awesome. We'd love to have that. It's so exciting that
Great.
all of this is happening like right now, and
It's
continuously
really,
as
really
well.
good. Yeah, I mean the bond money was definitely like the catalyst that we needed to really get things moving. And we've had these affordable housing developers who previously haven't done a lot of work in Durham, like DHIC, this new one called Laurel Street, now coming in and doing multiple projects, different places all around the city. So we're definitely attracting some affordable housing development attention because there is now the city money available for it, which is good. And I mean, given how construction is really hard right now, like prices for materials are going up. It's really hard for contractors to find workers. Actually, if you haven't decided what you want to do yet when you graduate from high school, there's a huge opportunity in the construction trades, like for engineers and plumbers and electricians and just all those folks. There's a ton of jobs, and people cannot fill their jobs as fast as as fast as people want to build. There's like not enough people to fill the jobs. So yeah, we've been lucky to find some really good partners who have been able to deliver these projects, like mostly on budget and mostly on schedule, which is pretty much magical. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's really awesome that it's all coming together.
Yeah.
Um, I had another question. So in the 2019 survey, you mentioned that access to transit was very important to you, especially for low income communities. And we're wondering, what have you done? What has Durham done to continue supporting access to transit for all?
Yeah. So a couple things on that. We've also gotten some federal money for transit, which has been really great to help keep our system running during COVID. We are one of the few transit systems that have actually not seen a decrease in ridership during COVID. And that's because the vast majority of the people who use our bus system in Durham come from 0 or 1 car households. So people rely on transit as their primary mode of transportation, and that has continued throughout the pandemic. So what we've done is we've increased funding for bus shelters. That's been a major complaint in the community, that our bus shelters are inadequate and don't exist in a lot of places. I think we need something like 1,000 more bus shelters in the city in order to cover the whole system. Yeah, it's pretty intense. So we are funding 100 a year approximately, and so we've increased funding for that in order to try to meet that need. We're also considering right now a green equitable infrastructure bond, or increased funding in our capital plan that would provide more sidewalks in areas where there are bus stops to improve pedestrian access, and would improve the signals at intersections for safer pedestrian access to those bus stops. That's another thing we talked about yesterday that we're moving forward in the next year or so. We're also trying to green our bus fleet. So we have purchased, I think, 5 electric buses, and the first 2 are going to arrive in the next couple of weeks. So that's really exciting. And because of that, we now also have to increase our electric vehicle infrastructure. So we're trying to figure out how to do that so the buses can, we got to figure out where they're going to charge and how they're going to, charge throughout the day. We did a big evaluation of all of our bus routes and changed things around to try to get more buses on more heavily trafficked routes. The goal is that people don't have to use a bus schedule, right? That you can walk out of your house and walk to the bus stop and know that a bus is going to show up within 10 or 15 minutes. And that means we need more buses and shorter headways in order for that to happen. If it's more than about every 15 minutes, then if you show up right after the bus comes, you're waiting there for half an hour, you're going to be late to work or school or wherever you're trying to go. So trying to get more buses on the roads on those highly trafficked routes. And we changed up the system so that we were doing more buses on more highly trafficked routes. We're also expanding the on-demand service. So for areas where there isn't a bus, you can use an app to get an on-demand ride, which would be like an Uber or a Lyft, but you would only pay the bus fare. And that's something that they were looking at pre-COVID. I'm not really sure how COVID has how COVID has impacted that project. There's another project that we were looking at pre-COVID, improving the access van, the vans for people with disabilities, that you can schedule them and they will come pick you up. They're wheelchair accessible, take you where you need to go, and you only pay the bus fare. And we've had issues in the past with not having, with rides being really slow, with not having adequate vans and staffing for that program. So that's something that we're working on improving as well. And in addition, because of the recent federal packages, we're going to get even more money for our transit system. So we may have some opportunities to do even more improvements. And we're trying to figure out, after light rail was abandoned, we have this tax money that was originally going to go to light rail that we now need to figure out what we're going to do with. And so we're doing a whole transit plan with community engagement and in cooperation with the county, and we'll have to figure out kind of what's our big local and regional transit solution going to look like without light rail, and planning for that. And so that sales tax money will go towards that big plan. But right now it's also going towards some other things. We can use it for any expansion of service. We can't use it for service we already had. We can use it for more service. And the bus route, the bus system is definitely the priority, because that's where our most transit dependent and low income riders are.
Awesome. Is there a place where we can follow up on this transit plan that you're doing?
Yeah, let me look that up. The transportation department is doing that. Durham, yeah. So if you go to engagedurham.com, I'll send you this list. They've been doing a bunch of community outreach around the transit plan, and also around the comprehensive plan, which is the land use and zoning plan for the city and county. So both of those have been doing a lot of community outreach for those over the last year and a half. And the plan was, of course, to do it all in person, and then COVID happened. So they've been trying to do as much of it virtually as they can. It's hard to do equitable engagement virtually, of course. So they're trying to figure that out. So yeah, there's some good resources on the Engaged Durham site. And then that second link is the affordable housing bond information from community development.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I love that there's so much being done despite, the pandemic, maybe because of it.
Yeah,
I've done
with the
a youth
housing
listening
stuff.
project. Yeah, the housing stuff. Oh my goodness. And what really stuck out to me about what you were saying about Durham is that I feel like a lot of municipalities and just people in general have this mindset that affordable housing is just making housing, more affordable. And I don't think it's as simple as that. And so I really appreciated, looking into encampments and doing work to help what we can in all these different aspects. So I really like that.
Yeah. The housing plan has a lot of moving pieces, and some of it's providing more housing, and some of it is really more like providing social services.
Yeah. I love that. All right. And I had another question. You stated that you do not support ICE working with Durham Police Department and advocated for a more rehabilitative and holistic approach to reducing crime. Do you still hold these values? And if so, how have you implemented them? I know that the pandemic in this past year has really exposed racism and other discrimination to certain groups. And so I was wondering about that specifically.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about some of the work that we've been doing around public safety in the city. The big thing that's happening in the next couple of months is we're launching a new Department of Public Safety. So it's a Department of Community Safety, which will house alternative response programs for crime reduction, for community support. We did a big audit of all of our 911 calls and found that the vast majority of the work that the police are doing does that actually involve someone committing a crime. And so we're hoping that we'll be able to divert a large amount of that work into this new department, so that if someone needs a welfare check, or someone needs traffic directed at a parade, or someone gets in a crash, or if someone is having a mental health crisis, that there will be different kinds of city employees who will be trained and who will be unarmed to go to those situations and help people. So that's a big piece of what we're trying to do now, is build out unarmed response alternatives that would then be housed in this new department. Another piece of work that we've done is expand our violence interruption program, which is a joint city county initiative that puts people who live in higher crime neighborhoods in the position of intervening, being empowered to intervene in cases of violence before they escalate. And they will do things like go to the hospital if someone has been injured in a shooting and talk to that person to try to prevent any kind of retaliatory shooting from happening. They'll, if they hear about some kind of conflict that's happening in the neighborhood, they'll like go talk to those people and try to negotiate some sort of resolution of that conflict before things get out of hand. So that's been really effective in the couple of neighborhoods that we've had so far. I think they've been in 2 neighborhoods. And so we've just provided the county with a grant to expand to 4 additional neighborhoods. So that should be happening soon. As regards ICE in the jail, yeah, I mean, I think that the Durham Police Department does not work with ICE. We don't do any kinds of collaboration with immigration enforcement. I fully support that policy and support continuing that policy. The Durham County Jail continues to have a policy of not honoring ICE detainers or holds, so that if a person who is an undocumented immigrant is in the jail and they've served their sentence or they're eligible for bail to be released, absent any sort of immigration consequences, they will be released. So people aren't being held because ICE wants them held, which I also support. There's immigration policy is shifting right now with the new federal administration. It's not shifting as fast as I would like it to. Joe Biden is still deporting a lot of people, and I think he should stop doing that. But in terms of the problems we saw under Trump with ICE going into neighborhoods and raiding workplaces and, taking people, kidnapping kids on their way to school, like this kind of stuff, we haven't seen as much since Biden has taken office. And so I think that we are in a better place than we were a year ago, but definitely still need to keep pushing for the kinds of federal immigration policy that's going to keep Durham residents safe. And that's, that kind of our position as a city really, is lobbying. And at that point, lobbying our federal representatives for the kind of immigration policies that we want. And also the state for the kinds of state laws that we need, right? Like right now, there's some horrible bill that the governor has vetoed about forcing sheriffs to cooperate with ICE and honor ICE detainers under North Carolina law. Like those sorts of legislative attempts to preempt local authority, we continue to try to fight back against those.
Thank you so much. Oh, that Mira is taking notes currently, and I want to check in with her before I ask my final question. Are you all good with the notes so far?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And my final question is, in the 2019 questionnaire, you argued for more opportunities for youth to increase employment rates. And how have you worked to make this a reality? Have you thought of anything you would like to add or remove from this statement that you've made?
Yeah, so we have this Youth Works Jobs program, which unfortunately COVID has had a major effect on. We had initially had a goal, I think a couple of years ago. So what's it, 2021? In 2019, I think we had 250 or 300 students participate in the program. And our plan was to increase that to 1,000 students within 4 years. Unfortunately, we had to cut the program and scale way back last summer because of COVID and are doing the same this summer. So we really won't be able to get started moving on that goal until summer of 2022. And that's, just an unfortunate reality of the pandemic. We don't feel safe putting young people into, public facing jobs with the situation that as it currently stands. And we're not sure that we're going to have widespread enough vaccination for it to make sense to do it this summer either. But as we move forward, I continue to have that goal of expanding that program to at least 1,000 jobs. We've also funded Made in Durham to do more training and work with young people around job readiness and job preparedness. I think we gave them, I don't know how much. I thought it was like $1 million grant, but that might be wrong. Don't quote me on that. We gave them some money to continue doing that work. And yeah, we're hopeful that we'll be able to keep doing that, that we'll be able to continue to expand the youth jobs program in the future. Whenever we have people who come to the city as contractors, when we have new contractors, we always make sure that they know about the program and encourage them to host youth interns over the summer. The big lift for that program is getting more private employers involved. A lot of the youth work for the city and the county and the school district, but we really need more private employers to get on board, particularly in those high growth industries and industries where there are a lot of jobs available. So that's the kind of outreach that we need to be doing as soon as, and as soon as the pandemic situation feels more under control, we hope to pick that back up.
Awesome, thank you. And just as a follow-up question to that, real quick, you mentioned more private industries and more involvement in that, and having more and more youth participating in these programs. Beyond that, and even including that, what would you see as your vision for Durham's youth in the next 2 years?
With jobs specifically, or broad?
Jobs specifically, but if you'd like to go beyond that, we'd love to hear it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, what I think we need, right, is a complete like school to career pipeline where we have partnerships with Durham Public Schools, Durham Tech, and employers, right? So that students can start getting training in high school for the kinds of jobs that are here in our community, that are growing in our community. And there are certain industries that are coming to Durham more than others. So there's lots of biotech coming to Durham now. There, tech companies in general, lots of that, lots of construction, lots of healthcare jobs, lots of care jobs in general are a growth industry, right? So making sure that that students in high school are getting the kinds of training that they need to then be able to get their post high school training at Durham Tech or through some sort of trade school, and then be able to immediately go to work and be able to make a living wage, better than a living wage, right? Have living wage employers lined up. There are a lot of kids who are going to graduate from high school and go to a 4-year college and get a professional job, and I'm not worried about those. They're going to be fine. I'm worried about people who, without the right training and that pipeline existing, are going to end up working for $7.25 an hour target. And we also need to figure out, we need a national minimum wage increase so that no one is getting paid less than a minimum wage, because that's what we know, or less than a living wage, because that's what we know people need to survive. But what I want to make sure that we're doing is finding as many ways for our young people to get living wage jobs as possible. And we have done, we've done resolutions to the state and the federal government around increasing minimum wage, because there always are going to be low wage jobs unless we force employers to pay more. But in the meantime, right, I want people to be able to be trained and ready to get those higher paying jobs, so that we have so that as many students in Durham as possible are able to actually provide for themselves, post high school and post college. Broadly, I think we're getting better at listening to young people and incorporating young people's ideas into what the city is doing, but we need to do that more. Our Office on Youth has, recently done the youth listening project that you mentioned, and is rebuilding the Durham Youth Commission into a very different kind of organization that would be like more advisory for elected officials and for other city staff, city work around like youth, about having a youth perspective and making sure that young people's voices are being heard and are part of the conversation. And I really appreciate the work that they've been doing to move us in that direction and really be like youth-led and youth-focused. They've also really been trying to take us beyond kind of the traditional sort of people who get involved in that kind of work, who tend to be, like middle to upper middle class, college bound, like already kind of high achieving students, and reaching out to kids who have more diverse identities, people who are working class, people with disabilities, LGBTQ kids, Black and Latino kids, Asian and Indigenous kids, like people who we can learn a lot more from, but who might not necessarily be like already aware of these kinds of opportunities, or likely to participate in this kind of a program without a little bit of encouragement. And so they've been, reaching out to the folks who do like the juvenile justice work to see if there are any justice involved youth who might want to participate in these sorts of programs, and really trying to like diversify the experiences that we have informing us, which I also think has been really useful and really good. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love this. You're painting an ideal picture for me in my head. I'm really hoping that, it all come together. I'm really excited. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Mira to talk about kind kind of the future and thinking about like things more personal to you based on the 2019 survey. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for answering all of our follow-up questions. And now we have a few questions about some new issues that youth are interested in that we didn't have on our 2019 questionnaire. So our first one is, what do reparations mean to you? And how do you think the city should handle this issue in the upcoming years?
That's a great question. So for me, reparations are direct payments to descendants of enslaved Africans to compensate for the gap in wealth between white people in the United States and Black people in the United States, which we know is has been caused by the long-term impacts of that enslavement, as well as decades of racist public policy that has prevented Black people from building wealth at the same rates as white people. How the city should handle it, I think, is a tricky question. Like, there are cities that have done things that they have called reparations, or like have done reparations funds or things like this. To me, those are not actually reparations. Those are just things that cities should be doing to promote equity and to help their communities. Like, cities should just support their African American cultural centers. They should just fund the schools. They should just give people scholarships. Like, to me, none of that is actually a reparations program. And the city of Durham and even the state of North Carolina aren't really big enough, don't really have the money or the city does not have the taxing authority to be able to do a reparations program in a way that would make sense. Really, the government that has to do that is the federal government. They're the only government that could increase taxes on billionaires and redistribute that money to people in the form of reparations, which is what I think needs to happen. The city is going to put together a racial equity fund. That is something that our Race Equity Commission recommended and that we're going to move towards doing over the next couple of years. And that is money that would go towards repairing some of the past harms of government decisions that have had a disparate racial impact. So maintaining the Black cemetery that was neglected for a number of years, helping support the Hayti Heritage Center, scholarships for students from low-income backgrounds, all these different ways that we can support equity in the community broadly. But to me, that's not reparations. Reparations is really money from the federal government to Black people. We did pass a resolution last year, I think, that called for federal reparations sufficient to eliminate the racial wealth gap, as well as a guaranteed federal jobs program and a $15 an hour minimum wage. One other thing I can't remember. So I think our role in that is to put pressure on our federal elected officials to move in that direction, and locally to do as much as we can to promote racial equity and to put money into that as well.
Thank you. It sounds like you put a lot of thought into that. And our next one.
It's a big issue. Lots of questions.
And what do you think the current mental health needs are in Durham? And how should this impact city policy in areas such as the police department, teen and youth centers, and other places?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the mental health needs in Durham are, the same as mental health needs everywhere. Lots of people, and especially right now, given the pandemic, there are really high rates of depression in the community. There are really high rates of anxiety. I contribute to those high rates of anxiety. There are a lot of people who have spent the last year feeling really isolated and scared. And so I think we, need to be approaching public safety, education, all of our institutions with that in mind, with knowing that our community has undergone a really difficult period and a lot of people have been traumatized by it, and that a lot of people are traumatized in their life in general, right? That there are a lot of situations where people experience trauma, and we need to use trauma-informed methods of dealing with community and dealing with issues that come up. As regards policing, as like I said before, we're hoping to do mental health first responders. That would be, unarmed, crisis trained folks who could come help folks who are experiencing a mental health crisis. We don't do, the city doesn't do public health. That's a county function, but I know that they are supporting a behavioral health urgent care clinic that I was able to visit a couple of years ago, that I have had a couple of friends take advantage of, and I know has been really really helpful in the community. Yeah, I think everything else is probably more on the county side than the city side, but I think in general we need to be very aware of the situations that people might be dealing with and mental health issues. And as someone who's struggled with anxiety, it is very much at the forefront of my mind when dealing with this pandemic and crisis, and just crisis situations in general.
And there's currently a lot going on in Durham that the city council has to address right now, but if you had to pick, what 2 to 3 issues do you think it would be most important for the city to address in the last 2 years of your current term?
Yeah, so definitely like COVID response and recovery. We are having a meeting on Monday about trying to improve equitable access to vaccination. And that's going to be a big issue over the next year or so. Also, the economic recovery from COVID, making sure that people are able to stay in their homes who may have built up a backlog of rent during the moratorium, but soon that's going to expire. And, if you've got 6 months of rent due, of course, you don't have that. So being able to, to make sure people are able to stay stable in their housing in general, like COVID recovery, I think is a big piece. Which then, overlaps. And I think housing is the second big thing, right? Like we are still growing. We thought maybe the pandemic would contribute to a little bit less migration, but the population growth in Durham has continued unabated over the last year. And so we still need to be, building more affordable housing and making sure that we are providing adequate housing resources for people who live here, as well as people who are moving here. We have a big partnership with Durham Housing Authority that we are continuing to redevelop all the public housing communities all over the city. And so there are a few that will be started over the next couple of years that we'll need to provide city resources for. So that's the big priority. And then I think the third one would be public safety, both, dealing with the fact that the pandemic has caused an increase in crime and in violence around in the city and around the country. And we need to figure out, ways to effectively deal with that. Tripling the size of our violence interrupter program was a non-traditional way that we hope to, have an impact on that. And we're going to continue to figure out ways to try to reduce crime and violence that folks in our community are experiencing. And then also building out our alternative infrastructures for public safety, our community safety department, the mental health first responders program, unarmed traffic enforcement, and any other ideas. There's some ideas around like court diversion and expanding diversion programs. We've got a new community safety and wellness task force that's a community-led group that's going to be meeting to think about and propose new ideas and evaluate the programs that we have going on. So I think those would be my 3 big things: COVID recovery and relief, housing, and public safety.
Thank you. And those are all the questions we had for the interview. But before we close, is there anything else that you want to say that you think is important for Kids Voting Durham to know?
The only thing that comes to mind is so this is kind of a weird year for elections, right? That we might, because the census results are delayed, we may end up in an interesting situation around like deciding whether we're going to have a municipal election this fall or whether it's going to be delayed. So I feel like that's just something to pay attention to. I feel like it'll be an interesting lesson in politics, depending on what happens. There's talk at the General Assembly about like forcing all of the cities to do the same thing. Different cities who have different ways of drawing wards are subject to different rules. So potentially an interesting sort of current event civic engagement project that we're all trying to figure out right now as well is what's going to happen with that. And then redistricting, this year or next year, if if the results get delayed, kind of seeing how that impacts Durham. We may end up in a different congressional district. We may have a new congressional district that's drawn in North Carolina and may go from 13 to 14. And so Durham may be in an entirely new district with a new representative. So there's lots of interesting political questions this year that y'all might be interested in. Well, thanks, y'all. This was really great. I appreciate you doing the follow-up. It's important to make sure people are actually doing what they say they're going to do, because unfortunately too many politicians don't do what they say they're going to do after they are elected. So good looking out.